Welcome to the Rise Up in Business podcast. I'm Tracy Myler-Crane and I'm your host. I'm a business lawyer, an entrepreneur, a wife and a mum to two wonderful little people. This podcast is designed to be the business and law podcast for small business owners. Each episode explores different business and legal concepts in a clear and easy to understand way, all delivered in bite-sized chunks that are easy to listen to. You're sure to be able to take little nuggets of gold from each episode and implement them into your business straight away. I'm bringing you these podcast episodes each week with my intention being to share with you what you need to know to feel empowered so you can rise up and take control in your business. Let's get into today's episode. Hello everyone and welcome back to the Rise Up in Business podcast. I'm so pleased to be able to bring today's guest to you. This is going to be a really empowering conversation for so many listeners. Today I'm talking with Dr Kristy Goodwin. For those who don't know Kristy is a digital wellbeing and neuro-productivity speaker, author and researcher. I first met Kristy a couple of years ago and I was instantly drawn to a discussion we were having around the impact of this digital culture that we're living in on children. And our discussion morphed then into the impact it has on small business owners. Kristy, welcome.
Great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for agreeing to do this episode with me. I've been talking a lot on the podcast recently about business owners who reach sort of around that 3-year mark and are feeling all the feels. So we're doing all the things, we're stressed, we're pressured, we're wearing all the hats, and it's like taking a pause at this point to come up for air and ask ourselves what next. This context of our discussion today is around what I now know to be a thing, which I've learnt from you, which is digital overwhelm. My gosh, overwhelm is something that we experience all the time, and like many of the clients and many of the women I speak to, there's a lot of guilt attached to that. But in hearing you speak and in following your work, I've learned that there is a thing called digital overwhelm. It's not all our fault. It is okay and we can deal with it. Can you talk to us a little bit about that? Just dive straight into this whole thing about digital overwhelm. What is it? Where did it come from? And why are we all suffering so much?
So I'm going to add to your vernacular today. And not only do I think we're experiencing a huge, in fact, the pandemic increased most adults' digital load. We did the digital pivot to online working. We saw, and we've got data, Microsoft actually tracked a lot of this during the pandemic. And what they found was that we saw a surge in our digital usage. Microsoft users, so just Microsoft, not Gmail users, but in March 2021, they sent 40.6 billion more emails than they did in the previous 2020, in the previous month, in the corresponding year. So if you feel like your inbox is bulging, you're not imagining it. We are seeing this increased digital load. And the problem is we have ancient Paleolithic brains. We have brains that are designed to go and forage and hunt and seek for information at a time, at a pace and a cadence that suited us. But in this digital world we found ourselves in, both professionally and personally, we now have information constantly being thrust at us, alerts, notifications, pings, dings, reminders, and our brain actually isn't biologically designed to cope with that just incessant onslaught of information. Now, the problem also is not only is the information coming to us frequently, but it's the volume of information. I don't know about you, Tracy, but I suffer from infobesity, this idea that we are just drowning in information. And we've got studies that are telling us the average adult is consuming 34.6 gigabytes worth of information every single day. That's more than what our ancestors consumed in a lifetime. I often say we can't outperform our biology, or I call it our neurobiology. We have a basic blueprint for how our brain and body is designed to work. We can't shift that. We need to start to work with that. And so we need to figure out how can we deal with this just sheer volume and frequency at which it's being thrust at us to work in better ways that works for our brain and body. So you're not imagining it. We know now, the tools that were meant to make us more efficient, like email, like Slack and Teams, have actually increased our digital load. Then add in, if you're a parent or a caregiver for elderly parents, the other communication platforms that we've become reliant on. We can see, I actually think that emoji, with the person with their head exploding, I think that describes most people today in this digital landscape.
Oh my goodness. Just hearing what you've just said, on one hand, I think, holy moly, that's actually a real thing. But on the other hand, it's a relief. Oh, it's actually, one, I'm not imagining it. It's not just me. There's not something wrong with me. I don't need to feel guilty about this. This is happening all around us. The research is in. You've just pointed to one of the studies.
Yeah, and I think we do need that collective, almost like a collective sigh. I'm not imagining this, because what I'm hearing anecdotally from the organizations where I'm speaking at, or the clients that I'm working with, is that people are looking around and thinking that they're the only one that is feeling bamboozled, feeling like they can't get on top of their to-do list, feel like they need to declare email bankruptcy, feel like they just cannot deal with the tsunami of notifications that just keep coming their way. And so people often go off in a quest to look for the newest productivity system. They go and think that if I download the newest app or piece of software or project management tool, I'll finally get my digital ducks in a row and I will deal with this. But we're not getting to the root of the problem. And I think the root of the problem is that we are mapping outdated ways of working. We are working against our neurobiology, and we are not creating sustainable digital habits and behaviors that work with our biological blueprint. So I think we need to address those before we try and find the latest hack or tool or app, because in doing so, we end up adding to that digital overload in the first place.
You've just described me, I think. I'm that person, if I can't, perhaps I'm letting myself down, I'm not up with it, everybody else knows what they're doing, it's only happening to me, therefore I need to go and find another platform to manage my platforms. So what do we do?
First of all, I work with organizations on how to do this. We need to, at an individual level, I say to people, do a digital audit. Look at the plethora of tools, apps, sites that you rely on, and then start to eradicate any that aren't essential to the core role that you are using. Then I think we need to actually establish our digital guardrails. So we need to, and again, if you're a small business operator and you've got a small team, if you've got a more sizable team, still, this is the sort of thing that you can do. But we need to sit down with our colleagues. We eventually, once we've articulated our digital guardrails, we need to politely communicate these parameters to our clients, to our subcontractors. And I call this managing people's tech expectations. So really trying to set the digital parameters and boundaries so that if something does warrant your urgent attention from a client, you have a communication escalation plan. So you know that you don't need to be checking emails, Teams and Slack and your phone and the WhatsApp group to just keep on top of things, because this is what we're hearing from people. People don't feel like they can ever digitally disconnect. They feel like they're always on. And we are not machines. We're not designed to be on all the time, 24/7. It actually is counter to our productivity and performance. And I often say you cannot be fully on if you're never fully off. So we need to come up with these digital guardrails so that we know what are the norms. So I often say start internally. So at a micro level, what are your parameters? Where are the no-go tech zones at home? What's an expected or an acceptable email response rate that you think? Then take another step out of that circle and start to look, if you do have a team, even if it's just a small team, can you co-create your team's digital guardrails? So what's the protocol around virtual meetings? Do you need to have your camera on or your camera off? If it's only one or two of you in a meeting, could it be that a phone call will suffice as opposed to having a video call? What is an acceptable internal email response rate? How do we escalate urgent matters internally? So coming up with those parameters. And then the final step is communicating those parameters when you're either onboarding new team members or subcontractors. And then a final part is clearly communicating those to any other people that you might work with, particularly clients, because I'm hearing, especially from a lot of small business owners, saying, I need to be responsive. And that is true in some regards. If it is a timely matter, then in many instances you do. But I think we've often told ourselves that we have to be responsive. Let's be honest, most of us listening today are not performing brain surgery. So there's not, we've bought into the hustle and busy culture that says you have to be responsive, and we're using busyness as a proxy for productivity, and it's not. So I think that those guardrails are just so critical.
Listening to you here, I don't know about, well, I do know about how this is going to sit with listeners, but this is feeling like a permission slip to me, because I feel guilty in my business because I've come from the traditional legal practice where you basically devote your entire existence to the law firm and all of the things, and your purpose in life is to serve your clients at the expense of yourself. So I've bucked all of that, and I'm now doing things my way, and it's just on 3 years. But I still feel guilt because I work flexibly and remotely. I feel guilt. If I do the school run, which I do 3 days a week in the afternoon, and I love that, it really fills my cup. But I then feel like I must be available the moment I get back in the door because I've just taken an hour out of the day, and therefore I must be available. And that adds pressure to me. It does. It mucks with my mind and my head. And I must say, since I started this business, I started suffering migraines, and I genuinely think it's tech related. But the truth is, in that last hour since I've been away from my computer, the world hasn't ended for anybody. And if something urgent has happened, which it never does, someone will ring me. But I have the guilt and the pressure I put on myself. I must get back in front of the computer, and I must now be available in front of the computer for an extra hour tonight into dinner time. But you see, I've just explained something that I've created myself because of the digital culture that we're living in.
And it is. And I think what's happened at a macro level is we have superimposed the industrialized model of working, which was time for money. And we have superimposed it into this digital culture that we have created where, you're not necessarily paid per hour or per widget like we used to think about productivity. And so I really think we need to redefine what is being productive. And what I challenge people, and this is where I think, for me, the silver lining of the pandemic for knowledge workers, and I acknowledge that this is a privileged position for us as knowledge workers, but the advantage of knowledge workers from the pandemic is that most people have now got much more flexible work arrangements. And I think that's wonderful. I think we need to be shifting the conversation, and we need to be talking about productive work arrangements. And the way I got around this, because I hear what you're saying, I came from an academic background and a teaching background, and teachers, you had to work. Well, I will say teachers never work 9 to 3. That is the biggest myth that has ever existed. They work far greater hours. But when you work for yourself, you often have that mentality that I have to be on and I need to be doing. But when we start to think about how can I be most productive, and again, I'm going to tie this back to when we work in alignment with our neurobiology, when we work the way we're biologically designed to operate, our output is far greater. And I think the biggest benefit from the pandemic is that we have now got, because of more flexible work arrangements, we can do our deep focused work during our biologically determined focus period of the day. And we each have something unique. It's called our chronotype. And our chronotype is our biological predisposition. It's determined actually by a gene, and you can't shift it, that determines whether you're a morning, a middle bird, or an evening person. And we all know intuitively what we are. If we don't, I've just released an assessment. Ironically, it's an online assessment, but it will pinpoint your chronotype, and then it gives you a suggested work schedule for your unique chronotype that can work. And I'm happy to share that with you and your listeners. But what this chronotype assessment does is pinpoint whether you're what we call a lark, a middle bird, or an owl. And then the trick is to structure your workday so you're doing your deep thinking during your peak performance window. And that is the time of the day that you have to protect. That is the window. So for me, I'm a lark. I fire on all cylinders early in the morning. So I get up and I build a fortress around my focus. I do not have any notifications coming in. I do not go down the avalanche of emails. I have some really strict digital borders and boundaries, and I get my deep productive work done. And so this is what we've got, I think, as an opportunity, is that we now have more scope over when we're going to do those tasks of day, because many of us are no longer bound to the 9 to 5 in the office, or most people aren't expecting people to be working 9 to 5 as well. So that's where I think we can start to look at those productive work arrangements.
I'm just writing notes here as I'm listening to you, and thank you for the offer. So I will get the link off you for the assessment for the chronotype and pop that into the show notes for people. That's genius in itself, because from the moment of waking until the moment of sleeping, so many of us, including myself, feel the need to be on. Otherwise, we're not doing it as well as we should be. We're not doing enough, and there's guilt. Then, when we're on, it's the emails. How many times a day are we checking our emails? If you're like me, it's about 100. That's my downfall, I suppose, my real weakness.
Yes, and it is for most knowledge workers that your digital Achilles heel for most of us is email still. Even with Teams and Slack and other alternatives, email still seems to be that weakness. So research actually tells us that knowledge workers are checking their emails on average every 6 minutes. Now, that's not only a problem in and of itself, but I want to give you some more research and some statistics that will nudge you to make some perhaps better choices and to turn off emails during particular times, particularly that peak performance window. Because for most knowledge workers, responding to emails is not deep work. Sometimes I understand it might be a tricky question. It might be something that you need to give some thought to. So for some roles, and I imagine your role, Tracy, some emails do require deep work. But for a lot of us, email is not necessarily, particularly more administrative email. That's what we call shallow work. So when we can start to structure our day in alignment with that neurobiology, we get far more done. So when we get distracted, whether it's the ping of an email that dances across your screen and then leaves, and you don't even open it, you just check maybe the subject and the sender. Or perhaps it was when you were homeschooling kids and trying to work and somebody came in and physically distracted you, asking for food, or maybe it's your pet or your partner who's co-working with you too. It doesn't matter what the distraction is, whether it's digital or in human. Once we are distracted, it takes the average adult 23 minutes and 15 seconds to get back into that deep focus state where they were before the interruption. 23 minutes, Tracy, for those you can't see, her drawers just dropped. And it's called the resumption lag. And so if you think, if on average we're checking every 6 minutes and then there's a 23-minute resumption lag on average. Now, it doesn't mean it takes us 23 minutes to get back in, but to get back into that productive work mode where we were. So the distractions are costly twofold. One, there's just the initial distraction, and two, it's the lag effect. And so we really have to try to eliminate, again, not for the whole day. I'm not suggesting we need to digitally abstain, but during those peak performance windows, we need to build a barrier around what distractions can come and vie for our attention, because the distractions are really costly. And despite the myth we've told ourselves, we cannot multitask. We're just physiologically incapable of splitting our attention.
Oh my gosh. I love so much of what you've said. The we can't multitask, that's empowering in itself, because as women, we by necessity do. I try very hard to move away from it and try not to, but I still get caught in it and think. I used to think back in the day at the traditional law firm that I was the queen of multitasking. Everybody knew it, so they'd load me up with everything. And of course, that came at my own personal cost of burnout and all the rest. Multitasking, I read a meme a little while ago which said multitasking is the new stupid.
It is.
In a non-offensive way. You can't do it and you're foolish for trying. I love that you've said that. So not only...
Can I just jump in here? Because so many of us try and dispel this myth. We think we can multitask it or we'll outsmart it. I want to ask you, Tracy, and I hope this isn't too confronting. When you do try and multitask, tell me how you feel.
Irritated.
Yep.
I get cross. I get snappy.
Yep.
Frustrated.
Yep.
Nothing good.
So let me tell you what's happening in your brain. When you are multitasking, a few things happen. We burn through our brain's glucose, which is our brain's energy supply. So we end up feeling really foggy. The other thing that happens is we release cortisol. Cortisol is our stress hormone. Cortisol not only makes us feel snappy and irritable and, moody and all the things we don't want to be, but cortisol actually inhibits our neural pathways from forming. So we can't actually retain the information when we're multitasking. And we've actually done brain scans and can see that when we are multitasking or we're attempting to multitask, it's actually called task switching or continuous partial attention. But when we attempt to do some sort of multitasking, what happens is our brain sends information to the wrong part of our brain. Instead of it going to our hippocampus, which is the memory center in our brain, when we multitask, it bypasses the hippocampus and goes to a part of our brain called the striatum. We won't remember the information when we multitask. The other thing that's really fascinating is that our error rates increase exponentially when we multitask. And we've done studies, again, that tell us that multitasking actually takes us roughly 50% longer than what it would had we monotasked instead. So if that's not enough evidence to say that multitasking, it does. It's basically making you stupid. It's impacting your IQ.
Okay. Wow. So this is a permission slip to step back, have a look at what we're doing, to know, first of all, let go of the guilt and the pressure that we feel to do all the things as a small business owner, particularly as you focused on and shone a light on the last 2 years. Things have changed, not necessarily for the better with the way we're making our choices and the habits we're developing. Step back and have a look at it. So we've talked about the email, and you know what I'm going to do as soon as I finish this recording, don't you?
I hope so.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to do that assessment. I think I know it anyway, and start looking at some better boundaries and be kind to myself in the process and not beat up on it, because that's where the guilt comes from. And a lot of my clients are small business owners, and we have these conversations. And that's why it's taken them this long to come to me, because they've been doing all the things and they've been putting it off, and they're just lucky they haven't been sued yet. But let's just not tempt that. But it's taken this long because we're doing all the things and we're juggling. What else can we be doing to give ourselves a break and to give ourselves a little leg up, if you like, in terms of combating the digital overwhelm, to move forward and develop some better habits and make some better choices? I love the way you framed that a moment ago, is choices. And you're right, it's like diet, isn't it? If you choose not to have the wine or you choose not to have the chocolate, this seems to be exactly the same.
Yeah, it is, like a digital diet. So I think we're on the risk. There's a lot of talk in the media at the moment about burnout, about employees, small business owners, because, let's face it, 3 years of a pandemic has been quite emotionally taxing for a lot of us. Our workloads and work ways have radically shifted for all of us, even if it's just the way you deal with suppliers or clients or colleagues. So what I think we're at the risk of is something called digital burnout. And it's this idea that our digital habits and behaviors that have really crept into every crevice of our lives, they're unsustainable and they're unhealthy. So a really simple thing that I think we can do to beat digital burnout is to take regular breaks. And our brain needs this. I call them peak performance pit stops. I don't know if you know, but a race car can actually make it around the race course and track and complete it without actually needing to stop. The reason that they take the pit stops is so that they can reach the finish line in an optimal way. So they can reach it there in the quickest time and being, a fully operational vehicle, hopefully at the end of it. So they're actually not necessarily, the tire changes and the oil, I thought it might have been a performance moment. It's not. It's actually to obviously top up. And so when we're working online, there are things that we're doing that are, and I often think of our brain a bit like a battery on our laptops. There are things that we can do that will deplete our battery. Multitasking, video calls, anything that is taxing will deplete the battery. There are also things that we can do that will replenish, that will recharge the battery. So we can obviously take stock of the things that are depleting. So monotasking, limiting your virtual meetings, working to your chronotype as opposed to against it. The other thing we can do to replenish is taking regular breaks. So we need to have 3 types of breaks: micro, meso, and macro breaks. So micro breaks are roughly 5 to 10 minute breaks, and you should be having these repeatedly throughout your day. Your brain's prefrontal cortex, so the part of the brain that helps us solve problems, it helps us think analytically, it actually only has about 4 to 6 hours of battery life a day, pardon the pun. So if you're going to sit down in front of your computer and expect to do a 12-hour day, your prefrontal cortex will stop after about 6 hours. So it's completely unrealistic to be punching out big days, day in, day out. So those regular breaks need to be interspersed 5 to 10 minutes throughout your day. And it can be as simple as standing outside. We have shown that just 40 seconds in nature So going and standing at your front door, walking the dog around the block, anything, but 40 seconds will reduce our cortisol levels, our stress levels. Simple. These are really not complicated things. But we've, again, bought into the busy culture where we're always on. And what we have done, I think, I'm talking about this trend called digital presenteeism. Because many of us are no longer in an office or not in an office frequently, we want to be seen to be productive. So we say, well, I can't be the last person walking out of the office and switching off the lights at night anymore. But what I can do is be instantly responsive to every email that comes in or every Teams notification. So taking those micro breaks is essential. Meso breaks are the second type, and they are at least weekly, having a good solid chunk of time offline. And so I'm not talking about a digital detox. I'm talking about at least trying to have sort of 2 hours where you're not doing anything at all with a screen. And the third type are macro breaks. And I recommend monthly, having a predictable time off, a day, a weekend where we get that time to recharge. Because I don't know about you, Tracy, but I have never, ever in all of history had a great idea land when I'm in my inbox or when I'm in an Excel spreadsheet. They come when I'm on a plane, when I'm going for a run, going for a swim. And we need that mind-wandering time. And that, as knowledge workers, is something that we need to factor in, because those creative solutions to problems, the problem, and I'm sure this happened to you when you were practicing in a law firm, the complex case that you spent months agonizing over, and all of a sudden that genius idea just drops. I bet it wasn't when you were sitting down looking at the case notes. It happened. And so we've got to factor in that time as knowledge workers, because that is really a critical component of our work. So those micro daily breaks, 5 to 10 minutes, meso, predictable time off. Maybe it's an evening where you go and do a sport activity. Maybe it's going and watching your kids on a Saturday. And then the macro breaks are a good chunk of time, at least monthly. And I say 1 to 2 days there.
My light bulb moment here, there's been many in this episode, and I'm going to watch this back shortly and take more notes because I've just been scribbling away. The light bulb moment here for me is it feels very indulgent to take time out. It feels very indulgent and slack and lazy and all of those things. You've just explained to us why it's not indulgent, why it's essential, and why it's foolish not to.
You've given me goosebumps, because I'm the first to say, I wore the hustle badge for years, as well as someone who left teaching and then academia and then started my own business. I thought that I had to always be on and always be doing the work. But I know for me, the best ideas, the idea, in fact, the idea for the chronotype assessment came when I was having a swim in the ocean. There you go. And then I got out of the ocean and quickly pulled out my phone, because I've got digital dementia and I knew if I didn't write it down quickly. But I think we've got to see rest as a responsibility, not as a reward. And so many of us say, when I get to the end of the big project, when I finish this big onboarding process with my new team members, when I get to Christmas, and I'm here to say, and I'm going to be totally honest with you here, someone who has personally experienced burnout more than once and clinically diagnosed burnout, I might point out, I'm here to say that if you don't take rest when you factor it in, you will get, I hope, can I say another word?
Yes, you can.
You'll get wiped out and put on your ass at the most inconvenient of times. You'll get physically sick. You will become physically incapable of working. And I'm here to say that the two instances where I've had burnout, I didn't see it coming. And that's one of the problems with burnout. It increases incrementally. But if you don't factor in and you don't take preventative steps to counter this digital burnout, then you will be inconvenienced, and it has far more dire ramifications for you in terms of if you'd taken some small, and they're not, micro breaks, 5-minute breaks, they really do work. But if we don't take that I think it's the shift, and we need, I think if you're working in an organization, we need leaders to be modeling rest. We need entrepreneurs and small business owners talking about this culture where rest is something that is revered. It's not feared. And we're not there yet, but that's something I'm really passionate about. And if I'm honest, I'm still working on this. I'm by far from perfect at this myself. And I think they say you teach what you need to learn. But I wholeheartedly say that when I am taking time out, the ideas are better, I work more productively. And so it's a win-win situation. It's just that shift in our mindset that we're not, let's get rid of, and I know you might cringe when I say this, but the billable hour mindset.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
It's so counterproductive.
I don't cringe at all. That's what my business model is based on. I did away with that a long time ago, but for different reasons. Hearing you talk now about it, holy moly, this has been one of the most inspirational conversations I've had in a very long time. You are an inspiration and a wealth of knowledge, and this is powerful. Thank you so much for giving me your time to come and share this. This is going to touch every single person that listens to this, because there is a mountain of gold nuggets here for everybody to take away and just start implementing. And for me, it's the permission slip, it's the awareness, doing away with the guilt, knowing that it's not lazy and it's not indulgent, it's necessary, and the rest is a responsibility, not a reward. I'm going to go and write that down and stick it on my screen. Kristy, thank you so much. I am going to include some details in the show notes, but for listeners who want to learn more about you and what you do, where can we find you?
The irony isn't lost on me that I'm trying to encourage you to curtail your digital usage, and I'm saying, hey, come on. But I do try and share practical tips and research-based information. So if you do happen to be on social media platforms, if you're a parent, I share lots of parenting advice via my Facebook page. If you're a professional, I tend to share more professional advice for adults looking to tame their tech habits on LinkedIn, and a bit of a combination on Instagram. I'm also happy to share with your listeners, I've got a quick ebook. It's really simple on 5 digital productivity hacks. So I'm more than happy to share that with you.
Such value. Thank you for your generosity. Thank you for your time. We'll include all those details in the show notes. I'm so grateful that you came on today.
My pleasure, Tracy. Thank you.
That's it for today's episode. Thank you for joining me. I very much appreciate you taking the time to listen. If you liked the episode, please be sure to hit subscribe so you don't miss any new episodes. And if you found this episode to be of value for you in your business, I would be ever so grateful if you would take a moment to leave a review on Apple Podcasts, because that will help this podcast reach the ears of more business owners. If you haven't already, don't forget to jump over to my website and download your free copy of my annual legal checklist designed specifically for small business owners. And if you're ready to set your business up so you can get paid every time hassle-free, check out my course, Getting Paid Made Easy. You can access these resources on my website at tmsolicitor.com.au. Remember, in business, prevention is better than cure. I'll be back with another episode for you next week. Until then, take care.